Chuck, so I don't have to keep moving back and forth anyway.
Chuck really packs them in, don't he? Big names here, and old friends and new ones. We've even got kids.
That's great.
Oh, you weren't talking about me.
We have Chuck speak every year because he's such a sweet. I don't, how long have I known you? Probably 15, 20 years. When I first started, we had a little firecracker called Marge Strickfist, and she started the club, helped start the club, and if you knew her, you loved her. She was 4 foot nothing and full of fire. And everywhere I went was with her. I walked behind her because she was so gregarious, and so Chuck knows where I'm going with this. Chuck walks up to me, I know you from somewhere, I know you. I go, I'm usually walking behind Marge. That's it. I never let him live it down. And he said, how long you been there? County Extension?
38 years.
38?
Yeah.
For Geary County. And he knows his birds and he knows his research. And there you go, Chuck. How's that?
That's all me. It is always wonderful to be over. If we get this, like we get this front bank of lights out or whatever, they don't leave them in the dark because Shannon will probably fall asleep if we do that. No, it's great to be here. I look forward every year to coming here. Usually about September, I'm going, oh man, what am I going to talk about this year? Jiminy Christmas. And I actually had a whole, when Dan or Doug or Mark, whoever contacted me back in the late summer, asked me to talk, I had a whole other topic in mind. I'll get to that story in a minute. I have been in Junction City for 38 years. I grew up on a farm in York County, Nebraska. I have 2 degrees from the University of Nebraska. Don't worry, I bleed purple now. My grandmother was a bird watcher. My mother was a bird watcher. I was genetically predisposed. I never had a chance. I was going to be a bird watcher. So in early September this year, well, what I want to do is we're going to talk a little bit about, it's all about Kansas birds, about distribution of birds and the populations of birds, because that's been a really hot topic of late. In September, okay, happy fingers, back up one. In September, this hit the news. 3 billion birds disappeared since 1970. 1 in 4 birds gone. Boy, did that start a firestorm. Now, this is what really annoyed me. A lot of these places took this, turned it into a big fundraiser. It's like, come on. Let's just talk about the real issues here. Bird populations. What did they talk about? And the paper that this is from is some amazing research, pulling together a lot of different resources from Christmas bird counts, and breeding bird surveys, and eBird, and just a lot of resources looking at breeding populations of birds in the United States and Canada. They started at 1970, which is, I think, pretty critical. That's when a lot of the environmental laws were starting to get enhanced, a lot of environmental protection laws. It was also about 5 years after they started the breeding bird survey, so we're starting to get some good data. And this is what they came up with. 2.9 billion birds gone. Wow. Up here we have the number of breeding birds. This is spring population. Keep in mind that over 50% of the birds born in any one year, well, they're not born, they're hatched. 50% of the birds fledged in any one year never make it to the next year. Some species as high as 80%. There is that much mortality. But what they're finding was that starting in 1970, they were estimating breeding bird population at 10 billion down to almost 7 billion. I'm just going to pause there and let that sink in. That is big. If somebody came here tonight wanting to know what's the smoking gun that we can fix, the problem is too complex for just one thing. Not all species are impacted the same. Birds are broken down into what we call guilds. The eastern forest birds, the Arctic tundra birds, the western forest birds. This is how much those guilds are down. Back in the 80s and 90s, Rachel Carson with Silent Spring was really emphasizing the loss of the warblers in the eastern forest. Heck, they're doing better than all the rest of them. Look out here. Grassland birds, 53%. That is near and dear to our hearts in Kansas. And if you aren't depressed by the end of my talk, I haven't done my job accurately, but I'll try not to, get too far down that road. It took me forever to figure this chart out. And most of these are from either from American Bird Conservancy or from Cornell Lab of Ornithology. The bigger the circle here, follow the line to that group, that's how much of a loss they have estimated. Sparrow family has been hit hard. 862 million lost. Now these little circles here, just assume that as a percentage scale. For the bobolink, 40% of the birds that were here in 1970 are all that we have left. We've lost 60% of the bobolink breeding population, which happens to be one of my favorite birds, but go up to the far upper right, evening grosbeak. We've lost 90% of the evening grosbeaks. Anybody that was bird watching the winter of 1985 and 86, we had evening grosbeaks everywhere. They're one of the big finches, they're gregarious, you would have a flock of them descend on your bird feeders, and all your sunflower seeds were gone in about 3.5 minutes. It's kind of like a goldfinch on steroids, a big bird. But a lot of the songbirds have been heavily impacted over the last 50 years. Winners and losers. At the same time that that's happening, waterfowl population has gone up 50%. You can thank Ducks Unlimited and a lot of the conservation efforts that they did. Raptors up 200%. Turkeys up 200%. Now, Kansas has had a bit of a fall off the last 5 years. I think that's primarily weather. For everybody that thought the turkeys were hurting the pheasant and quail populations, I haven't heard anybody yet blame the pheasant and the quail for the turkey population drop. But that's humor there, sorry. But overall, a lot of the larger non-songbird species are doing okay. Not great, but okay. I've had a lot of people in the past 4 months on the street in Junction City, newspaper reporters calling me up, right? We did an interview here. Where'd Joe go? There he is, yeah. We had a conversation last week. Is the loss real? I started bird watching when I was 4 years old. That was almost 60 years ago. That'll give you a clue of how old I am. I have seen it. It is real. And we're seeing it right here in Kansas. I've seen it in Kansas in the 38 years I've been living here. Bird numbers are dropping. There's winners, there's losers. It's all over the board as to what's happening. Bird distribution, what I'm doing now is transitioning into talking about bird populations in Kansas and bird distribution in Kansas. Because we've been seeing some interesting things going on. These are the kind of things that really get me excited. I'm sorry to admit I have a very strange life. But bird populations have always been changing and always will be changing. You see populations go up, go down, things move in, things move out. We've noticed it in the limited history that we've got in Kansas. Some birds do become extinct or extirpated. Extirpated simply means they used to be here, they're not anymore, but they are somewhere. Carolina parakeet, passenger pigeon, more than likely the Eskimo curlew, though nobody wants to go, yeah, they're gone. We're still holding out hope. We have non-native species arrive. House finch. House finch is a trash bird nowadays. They didn't start showing up in Kansas till the 1970s. Eurasian collared doves. Got a couple of fun charts on that sucker. Some species, their ranges are expanding across the state. They definitely are. Fish crow. We all have others that are changing. Black-billed magpie. It's easier to document range increases than range contractions, though. I'll tell you that right now. Shifting distribution is how birds adapt. We've noticed greater prairie chickens leaving or just numbers crashing in their traditional areas and increasing in northwestern Kansas. They seem to be going a little bit further north and stronger all the time. Lesser prairie chickens the same way. Climate change, large-scale landscape changes, there's a lot of different reasons. Okay, let's think about Kansas. Bird history. Lewis and Clark wandered up through the Missouri River in 1812, 13, you know. That's really the first actual records we have of birds in Kansas. Then the 1840s and 50s, they had all these scout teams that went across the country trying to find the route for the Transcontinental Railroad. I've got an old volume about that thick that reports all the things these people were finding. Fascinating. But really, until about the 1950s and 60s, our records are few and far between. We've got the records of people like Snow and Goss had with the birds that they shot and collected. Remember, prior to about 1940, ornithology was a shotgun sport. We didn't have the fine optics that we have. Shoot the bird, go out, pick it up, oh, that's what it is. That's why a red-bellied woodpecker is called a red-bellied woodpecker. You got a dead one in your hands, blow the feather out its belly, and it's got red underneath. That's where they got their name. Every person that has a woodpecker coming to their feeder goes, how the heck did that bird get that name? You know, so that's the way it was done. Note some early scientists. We had a lot of forts and outposts across the state. And a lot of those had a surgeon, a doctor, a trained scientist, often a biologist. Well, the soldiers didn't need help all the time, so they'd be out looking at what was out there. Plants, animals, making notes. Got some great records from the 1860s and 70s from the surgeons that were at Fort Riley. Fun to go back and look at that stuff. And then we had a few comments from those early ornithologists. But not until bird watching really started to become popular in the 50s and 60s did we start to get a lot of records. Professor Snow at KU in 1872 described the 282 species of birds known in Kansas. Let you now and realize that most of this is from the Flint Hills East. Goss in 1883, 320 species plus a list of 29 to be looked for birds in Kansas. Birds that he thought should be there. 3 years later, he was up to 335 species. Goodrich was a professor at K-State. He did a great book for the for the Kansas State Board of Agriculture about birds in Kansas. Interesting little treatise there. He never really said how many species he thought there were. He described some as good species and bad species for purely weird reasons. Dick Johnson in 1964 has a nice little book called Birds in Kansas, 383 species. Finally, I've got down here is 1991, but Thompson and Ely did a 2-volume set called Birds in Kansas. The 2 volumes were published about 2 years apart. They had 424 species. As of today, we're at 481 species. So the true recorded history is, what is that? 137 years maybe? Did I do the math right on that? That was just on the fly there. 147, okay, thank you. That's why I was a crop production major, not a math major. Okay, so let's talk about, when we're talking about bird distribution, I like to look at it in 4 different ways. Presence and absence. Has a species ever been confirmed in a county? A county record. We're doing that all the time. The next step up from that, I mean, that may just be one species one time. Like a couple of years ago, when the wind turbine technician was up on the wind turbine, looked out the access port, and there perched on the back of the wind turbine was a seabird known as a brown booby. And he wasn't a bird watcher, but he knew that's not a species of birds we normally see in Kansas. Pulled out his cell phone, took a picture of it, sent it to his dad, who was with Wildlife and Parks, sent it to a bird watcher friend of mine, who sent it to me, and I can't tell you what I said when I opened up that picture. But it was like, oh my. But there is a record for a brown booby in a county in Kansas. One and only. Okay, breeding. Do we have a confirmed breeding record? That's a higher level of presence, because birds normally breed where they are every year. In migration, they may be further east, west, north, south, but where they're breeding is probably a good sign that they're there annually. Range, that's the next step up. Where can that species be expected annually? I've got a series of maps here of the same species I'll show you in a minute. And then population dynamics. This is the challenging one. Is that bird species increasing, decreasing, or remaining steady? And for that, most of the time, we're going to fall back to breeding bird survey records. Here's our species for the day. Presence and absence. This species has been seen in all the counties that have a black dot in it. Okay. More strongly in eastern Kansas. We've got a swath going up here, then they scattered outlying reports in western Kansas. Let's add breeding records in that. It's an open circle, means we have a confirmed breeding record. A confirmed breeding record is a bird in a nest with young, is the ideal. But it goes down from there. There's several levels of breeding. Several levels of breeding. Now let's add the range onto that. In yellow says that is where we expect to find the bird nesting in the summertime. Green is where we will annually expect to see it in migration. And everything this side of that green line, green bar, is they show up occasionally, but we don't count on them every year. Anybody figured out what the species is yet? Then population dynamics. This is what a breeding bird survey historical map looks like. It shows over the span of basically from 1964 to about, I think this set of maps came out of 2000 up to 2016. Anything in blue means the population is increasing more than 1.5% per year. This, whatever color this is, turquoise, light blue, where's my artist friend? You know, it's increasing, just not as much. Yellow is basically neutral. The orangish color is down. The red is down a lot. You can see that this species is real. Now, the fact that it isn't shown as far here as it was on some of those previous maps is a mere fact because this is eastern whippoorwill. Eastern whippoorwill, you're going to find them by hearing them call. And with a breeding bird survey route, you start at half hour before sunrise and you go for 25 miles. It takes about 4 hours. You've got to have quite a few of them for them to be calling in the morning. But what we can see is eastern whippoorwill numbers are in trouble. They are declining. So those are 4 different ways that we look at bird distribution and population dynamics. I should say that I did not print enough handouts. I think I brought 40 handouts, but I've got all these slides on there. If you didn't get a copy, you want some, see me afterwards, give me your name and address, I will mail it to you. Or email address, I can email it to you. Okay, 1991, Thompson Neely, birds in Kansas. First time somebody had put down species by species county maps. Remember that first map, counties, black dots in them? It had it in there. The first volume, the first set, which was all the non-songbirds, they didn't have breeding records down. By the time they published the second volume a couple years later, they did have breeding records. That established our baseline. So from 1991 on, we can really start to hone in on these populations. 1992 to 1997, that's when the Kansas Breeding Bird Atlas was going on. Provided a whole lot more county by county data. A lot more. Of course, the book wasn't published until about 2003, but 2001, I had this harebrained notion to start the county checklists and maps, where I just started to collect everybody's records. If you have seen this species in this county, let me know. And I published them for all 105. And then in 2011, Birds of Kansas. Birds of Kansas was the first time that there was a detailed map of Kansas with ranges indicated. That sucked up 4 years of my life making those maps. I don't regret a day of it. From 2001, and we're still continuing with the county checklist. And now we have eBird records too, which is even more helpful. The county checklists are updated at least once a year, if not twice a year. I'm very OCD. I keep track of all those announcements and what was added on each occasion, which allows me to go back and year by year, from 2001 to present day, track when things were seen. light just go out there? Okay.
You're gonna lock the door.
Okay, well, that's fine. That means I got you all night here. Population dynamics, we basically have two sources of data. We have breeding bird surveys, and I'll talk more about those, and Christmas bird counts. You got one coming up here locally in 2 days? Yes. Saturday. Okay. Tracking range expansion. We have some inherent questions here. Is a species truly expanding its range, or is it simply a case of incomplete data? The county checklist I mentioned, 2001. In 2001, the first county checklist, 40 counties in Kansas had less than 200 species on the checklist. If anybody had been bird watching in those counties, they weren't recording it, they weren't reporting it. The lowest county in 2001 was Thomas County with 114 species. As of today, the lowest numbered county is, I think it's Wichita now. Anyway, it's 217. So there were simply a lot of counties that we didn't have very many records on. We didn't have the records. So, we know the species are expanding. We have introduced species. We have climate change. We have landscape level vegetation changes. We've got anthropogenic cause, human created causes, which can be all of these things and more. 1991, Eurasian collared dove. Freaking everywhere now. They weren't even in birds of Kansas. First Eurasian collared dove wasn't found in Kansas until 1996. We knew it was coming. It had come in on Florida, probably on ships, and it was working its way north and west. Little sidebar here. Everybody was looking for that bird down here. First one was found in Sherman County, good one. In fact, they've had a breeding population of over 30 birds. They've been there for several years. Birds have wings and they use them. Okay, by 2001, that's where the Eurasian collared doves were found. We already had a breeding record in me. Thank you, Tom Flowers. Today, it's everywhere. It is probably a breeding species in nearly every county. It's kind of like trying to get a breeding record for house sparrows or pigeons. Who bothers? They're everywhere. So that is a classic case of an introduced species expanding its range. The only time you cannot find a Eurasian collared dove is when you need one for your Christmas bird count. Guaranteed. Incomplete data. Incomplete data is usually going to be in the western half of the state because lower population, fewer birders, fewer records. I like to look at what I call indicator counties. We've got Ellsworth and Russell, Finney, Morton, Rush Pawnee, Sherman. Why are those my indicator counties? Mike Rader, Tom and Sarah Shane, Ted Cable and Scott Seltman, John Palmquist. Birders that have been birding a long time, keeping records. If a species is probably in that part of the state, they will have surely found it. Golden Crown Kinglet, 1991. A lot of gaps around the state. Morton, me, Finney, Pawnee Rush. All of these are simply a case of nobody is out in the cemeteries looking at the cedar trees and the pine trees in December for golden crown kinglets. Once we did, we're only missing, I think, 2 counties now.
Wow.
Now, there just aren't a lot of evergreens in Gove and Greeley County, but they're there too. We just haven't found them yet. So that's a case of incomplete data. There's a third category we've got to talk about, vagrants. Species not regularly in the state are likely to never be common in the state. More birders, we will get more detections. But at what point does a vagrant become an indicator of range expansion? Only people like me worry about that. Periloxia, close cousin to the cardinal, a bird of the desert southwest. 1991, one record, Morton County. Sebastian Patty and Max Thompson had it down there. Bird flashes across in front of them, and Max Thompson goes, "Oh, that's a cardinal." And Sebastian says, "Cardinal, my foot, didn't you hear that dry chip?" Chase it down, it was a Periloxia. As of this year, we've had it as far over as Lynn County. This was the most recent one in Harper County. Spent 2 hours sitting there looking for that darn bird. It never did show up. It was a windy day. I mean, I just picked the wrong day. But now let's look at what's happening in the rest of the United States with this species. Let's look at the breeding bird survey map. See the spike of blue here? That bird is expanding its range north. We will have more period loxia records over the next 20 years. Why? Good question. Good question. Global warming, perhaps. Okay, we're gonna have some fun now. I'm gonna go through a lot of slides in a hurry here. We're gonna look at 5 species that are experiencing noticeable range changes. White-winged dove, red-shouldered hawk, barred owl, pileated woodpecker, and black-billed magpie. White-winged dove in 1991 in Birds in Kansas, they described it as a likely vagrant. Records from 4 counties. A bird of the desert Southwest. If you've ever been down to, El Paso or in those areas, see them all over the place. See them all over the place. By 2001, 2005, 2010, 2015, and today. This is a bird that does not have a lot of winter hardiness. This species on the northern edge of its range frequently will be seen in the spring missing toes because of frostbite. Went the wrong way. It's kind of fun to run through that. Absolutely amazing. I know that I can hear them just about every spring someplace in Junction City. I can hear them calling. Are they nesting someplace? More than likely. Look at the breeding bird survey data. That bird is really expanding. It's to the point now that it's showing up in southeast Kansas often enough that it's showing up on breeding bird survey routes. I mean, the majority of this population is down in Mexico, but it is definitely moving north. Red-shouldered hawk. Red-shouldered hawk is the red-tailed hawk equivalent, only in heavier timber. They like riparian forest areas. They like large blocks of timber. They like large, mature trees. 1991. Don't have breeding data yet. We show up with breeding data in 2001. And it's already starting to move. 2005, 2010, 2015, and today. It is moving across the state. From the southeast of traditional hawk, if you want to see red-shouldered hawk, we went down into this area. And now it's all the way, it's breeding at a breeding pair at a Rock Springs Ranch in Dickinson County last year, 2 years ago. It's moving. Starting in 40s and 50s, we started moving away from burning or using so much firewood for heating our homes. We're going more to natural gas and propane and electricity. Once we quit harvesting so many trees, the trees along the streams, the rivers, started to increase. And by now, those are mature, full stands. So even though the effect happened in the 40s and 50s, we're now starting to benefit from that. Red-shouldered hawk breeding bird survey showing the same thing. This race in California is a beautiful bird, far more rufous than our red-shouldered hawk. Look at that as exploded up the west coast. A species that does well in urban environments. For a few more weeks, living in the west side of Junction City, nice little drawdown near the hospital, and starting about 5 years ago, red-shouldered hawks started showing up in our backyard during the wintertime. And we tracked down their nest. They're only a couple blocks away. Neat bird. Barred owl, it's the heavy timber version of the great horned owl. They're around everywhere. I thought they were always around. I talked to to Dan Lachelle, talking to Tom Shane. And when they were growing up in Junction City in the 60s, Barred owls were not common. 1991, 2001, 2005, 2010, 15, and current. Slowly working its way across. Go back here to 91. If that species was present, Scott Sutherland would have had them. Mike Rader would have had them. So that is another case where I have no doubt that they are expanding and increasing in population. Just going to go back through those. Breeding bird survey shows the same thing. Should be doing, breeding bird survey says not. This up in the Pacific Northwest is concerning. Barred owl is closely related to the spotted owl. It is far more aggressive, and where the ranges overlap, the barred owl will hybridize and take advantage and basically start crowding out the spotted owl genes. I've talked to biologists that have worked up in that area, and they have started depopulating barred owls from strong spotted owl country, just to try to keep the spotted owl genetics pure. So, pileated woodpecker, woody woodpecker, big bird, it needs heavy timber. First time I saw, that's 1991. I know maybe you can't see because I'm writing real wrong.
No, it's the computer screen.
Oh, it's the computer screen. That dot in Geary County, that was about 1997. It was a Saturday morning. My wife was working the flower shop at the time, and I was in an area there at Fort Riley with heavy timber, and a pileated woodpecker flew by in front of me. When your wife is also a bird watcher, this is where cell phones really started to get me in trouble. I called her to the flower shop to tell her I had seen a pileated woodpecker. I can't repeat what she said back to me because I saw it and she did it. We went down there on Sunday morning, and thank goodness it flew right in front of the car and landed on a tree right there so she could see it too. So, but it's another one that's moving right on north and west in the state. They're nesting in Geary County. I just haven't been able to find one at the nest. With woodpeckers, you have to have young at a nest. They will excavate dummy nests all the time, just like wrens will build dummy nests all the time. You know about house wrens, don't you? House wrens, the males come back about 10 days before the females do. They get back and they're not singing yet. They don't start singing until the females get back. During that 10 to 14 days before the females get there, the guys are going around looking at possible nest sites, and they'll start building nests in like 3, 4, 5 different locations. The females show up, the males start singing, and if she shows interest, he will take her around and show her all the nest sites. If one of them is okay for her, then they will bond for that year. And she will throw all of his sticks out and start all over again. Similarities to mankind, I will not comment on. But what happens is people will see them starting to build a nest in a house, and they go, oh, they're nesting, and then they're just gone. It was a enticement nest, and she didn't like that one. So that with woodpeckers and wrens, we've got to see eggs in a nest, young in a nest, something like that. Pileateds are expanding north tremendously. Tremendously. They go further north than that, it's just that's the limit of breeding bird survey routes. Get up in there, you kind of run out of roads. It's awfully hard to run those things without roads. What causes range change? Climatic change. Expanding riparian timber like we just talked about. Other population dynamics. Have 10 good years of weather and populations are going well, they will expand and they'll contract. Human-induced landscape changes. Urbanization, fragmentation, a lot of things like that. Disease. Disease can have an impact. I'm going to show that here in just a second. Range contraction is far more difficult to monitor and document. Expansion is easy. Oh, got a new record for Sherman County, got a new record for Logan County. We can march that along. But when it starts coming back the other way. Now, eBird they've got about 10 good years of data. And as eBird goes along, it's going to be very, very powerful in helping us know where things are going. But let's look at a different situation. If you look at the current map for black-billed magpie, in the 80s and 90s, these rascals were moving across the state. I did 2 breeding bird surveys around Milford Lake. by the late 90s and early 2000s, I knew that I could get black-billed magpies on one of my Christmas bird counts every year. Every single year. We had breeding records and Dickinson, Clay, and Riley. They're just doing great guns. Then something happened. Happy fingers. There you go. 2002, West Nile virus. Corvids, which includes magpies, jays, crows, were very susceptible. Boom. Populations crashed. We use it, this is from Christmas bird count data. And because sometimes you may have 25 people on a count, next year you may only have 10, we do something called averaging by party hours. So you use party hours as an averaging. Back here in the pre-West Nile virus, that green line is the average pre-West Nile virus. For every hour there was a party out doing a Christmas bird count, we figured you could get about 4/10 of a magpie, which sounds kind of weird, but just, you know, for every 2.5 hours they were out, you could get a magpie. Post, tenfold reduction. And it has not, and this goes out, that's very end point is 2018. They have not recovered. Crows are doing just fine. Population did drop and it came right back up. But with magpies, I think we just had that much lower of a population threshold in the state that it's just taking time. If you look at the breeding bird survey data, it's not any better. I know the folks up in northern Clay County said that they're starting to see them again. So that's probably where part of that little bluish dot is coming from. But that is a problem. Out in Central Valley, California, there's a sister species called the yellow-billed magpie. That thing is in serious trouble because it was such a small population to begin with. I mean, I'm surprised it's not on the endangered species list yet. Okay, breeding bird survey is one of the best pieces of citizen science we've got going. Started in 1964-65. It's a very prescribed route. It's ran during the month of June, basically from Memorial Day to 4th of July. On the prescribed route, you run the same route every year. Starting point is a half hour before, starting time is a half hour before sunrise. Every half mile, all the birds you can hear within a quarter mile. You got 50 data points, and you run the same way every year. The reason being, yeah, you're going to hear, if there's owls, you're going to hear them at the start. You're not going to hear them towards the end. But they're going to be there every year, in theory. And that's why we use it. Carolina wren is actually doing fairly well. In the process right now of analyzing breeding bird, Christmas bird count data from about 1960 to present for Carolina wren. Because back in the 60s and 70s, Carolina wrens, especially in the northern half of Kansas in the winter, were not common. Now they're abundant. Now they're abundant. However, black-capped chickadee, it's drifting north. It is drifting north. These areas are increasing. Kansas, eastern Nebraska, Iowa, decreasing. I've got some Christmas bird count data here I'm going to show you in a minute on these guys. Carolina chickadee is the southern equivalent, and it's moving north. We know it's moving north. Moving north, we suspect it about a half mile to a mile a year, and it replaces the black-capped chickadee. It's in Valley Forge, Pennsylvania, about 10 years ago, talking with a birder there. They said that in the past 20 years, they'd gone to all black-capped chickadees to now all Carolina chickadees. They pushed all the black-capped chickadees further north. They are more aggressive. Grasshopper sparrow, classic grassland species. Western meadowlark, our state bird. Yeah. I can go out any morning around Junction City and hear western meadowlarks, but not nearly as many as I did 30 years ago. Baltimore oriole. Now this one is kind of interesting to me. Look at this bluish swath through here. Where do Baltimore orioles build their nests? Out of the ends of large, mature trees. think about spotted owl, barred owl, pileated woodpecker, birds that are expanding across the state because of increasing amount of timber. I think those mature trees there are helping to buffer the decline in Kansas. Further south in Oklahoma, though, they're in trouble. Okay, Christmas bird counts. Far less standardized than breeding bird surveys. You got a 15-mile circle, you get together whoever you can, you go out and you have some fun, you count some birds. Because it is less rigorous, some years you may have 30 people, next year you may only have 15, so it's this constant change. So sometimes we have to put larger and larger data sets of Christmas bird count data together to get valuable numbers. We standardize by party hours, so we can kind of take that about. The good news is, we've been doing these for over 100 years now, 120, 20-something, yeah. 119, yeah. So, we've got a lot longer, and it helps tell us what's happening in the wintertime. We can do fun things like compare the numbers of red-breasted nuthatches to white-breasted nuthatches. And I showed this last year. If the number's high, we've got more red-breasted nuthatches. If the number's low, we've got fewer. Last year was a pretty good red-breasted nuthatch year. Not as good as 2012, and certainly not as good as 2007. I haven't seen one yet this year. I'm still waiting. We can show golden crown kinglets per party hour. Last year was horrible for golden crown kinglets. One of the lowest years we've had in a long time. I haven't seen one yet this fall. Almost winter though. So that's one that's going down. Chickadees, and I combined black-capped and Carolina chickadees. Another species that was very susceptible to West Nile virus. The blue line across here was the pre-West Nile virus average per party hour. Basically about three chickadees per party hour in all the Christmas bird camps across Kansas. This, just slightly more than 1.5, is the post-West Nile virus number. We've got disease that hit them. We've got probably climate change impacts. I don't expect these numbers to get any better in the near future. Got you depressed yet? It is not a simple situation. Human nature is, I want the smoking gun. Tell me the one thing we can do to fix it. Let's make it right. There is no one. We've got what I call tangible or direct things that we can count. Things that we can count. We've also got indirect. I'll talk about those in a minute. Cats. House cats. Whether they're domestic, whether they're kept in a house and allowed to run, come and go, or if they're just feral cats. A species that is not native to North America. And it's raising holy hell with a lot of wildlife. There have been multiple peer-reviewed studies that keep coming back to this very similar number, somewhere between 2.5 and 3 billion birds a year killed by cats. Doesn't matter if they've been trapped, neutered, and released. It doesn't matter if they're being fed. They kill. Cats are beautiful, wonderful, fantastic killing machines. We had Fred for 16 years. Fred was a Siamese tabby cross, and Fred stayed inside. Got to the point that she wouldn't know what to do when she was outside. But cats, from house cats to lions and tigers, are amazing. I love cats. They should not be outside. Period. Period. Collisions. That's collisions with everything except the windows. We've got separate count on windows. Collisions with communication towers. Collisions with buildings. Collisions with cars. Turkey vulture in the windshield. Never a good thing. But 624 million. Window collisions, 200 million. These are annual. You add number 2 and 3 up, and you're still at a third of what the cats are doing. And it's not just birds they're killing. In addition to that, they're killing snakes and lizards, anything that is a potential food source for them. They kill because it's their nature. Several millennia. Indirect. These are the ripple effects, the domino effects, the things that it's hard to put a number on. Climate change, landscape change, things I mentioned earlier, urbanization, fragmentation of ecosystems, anything that changes the flow, pesticides. A lot of the wildlife killing pesticides we aren't using anymore. They've been outlawed, but they're still very effective at killing food, insects. In our home landscapes, over 75% of the pesticides that we use in our yard and garden are for purely aesthetic purposes. They do not improve the health of the plant. We just don't want to see a few deformed petals in our roses. We don't want to have that little green caterpillar in our cabbage head. It doesn't improve the health, it just makes us feel better. There are far more grub insecticides applied to lawns every year than there are lawns that have grub problems. A preventative treatment is a waste of time. Pollution. We've seen a lot of the pollution protection laws rolled back in the past few years. That thing's going to have a long tail. So these are things that, yeah, they have an impact. We were talking at supper tonight about when the pheasant and quail population were crashing. And I'd have farmers come up and ask me why. I'd look at them and say, conservation tillage and Roundup. What? They're killing the birds? Not directly. Think about 1965. If you're in the western half of Kansas, you were planting wheat fallow rotation. Harvest the wheat in late June and early July, and then you wouldn't do a thing there until September, when you plow or disc before planting. As fields would grow up, sure, some volunteer wheat, crabgrass, foxtail, probably some lamb's quarter, some kochia. These were all plants that, in addition to having lots of little seeds that they produce in a hurry, by the way, they had lots of little insects. Provided cover, provided food in the form of the insects, provided food in the form of the seeds. And from 1st of July to the middle of September was enough time to get a lot of those little birds raised. Now we can go in, harvest the wheat, and apply herbicides to either keep the weeds from growing or to kill them before they get very big. We conserve soil, we improve water quality, and we've impacted the birds. A domino effect that was never intended. Producers would ask me, how do I get them back in? I'd say, be a sloppier farmer. So, 7 simple actions. Drink shade growing coffee. Remember, a lot of the birds that were crashing, these are neotropical migrants. These are birds that are going down to Central and South America to spend the winter. Going down to coffee plantations. I had a privilege about 10 years ago to be 2-week birding trip to Panama. Oh my gosh. And we would go up to sustainable coffee production areas, and the number of birds we'd find in those coffee plantings was phenomenal. Phenomenal. So, reduce plastic use. I mean, that's a whole talk in itself. Citizen science. The more data we have, the more we can figure out what the heck is going on. And part of the problem, in all honesty, is more and more scientific research is done by grants. Apply for this grant to study this. There is less and less money available, what I would call public money, for researchers to say, this is a problem we need to discuss. Because a lot of times, the questions we really have aren't on anybody's radar to provide a grant for. We need unencumbered funds to do that. Make Windows safer. There's some new technologies coming out and there's new things that we're finding out. Birds don't see each other and the world around them the same way that we do. If you haven't seen some of the studies done with fluorescence of feathers It is amazing. Totally by accident, some grad students were doing they were looking at, I think it was flying squirrels. They found out the flying squirrels fluoresce under black light. And they were taking some pictures of this, and somebody walked by with a screech owl skin, and all of a sudden it was like, and the feathers on this owl were fluorescing. Remember the old, well, for those of you that are old enough to remember the disco days and the black lights and your clothes, that kind of effect. Everybody that nodded yes, you were in the disco era, I can tell. So now there's just this whole big rush going, take every bird we've got a study skin of and put it under black light. And it is amazing what they are finding. Birds of the sexes seem very similar to us. Under black light, there are very definite sex differences. The birds can see that. That's how the blue jays know if it's he or she. We've always wondered. Now we know. Keep cats indoors. If it was me, that would be right at the top of that chart. Use native plants. Oh my gosh. Bush honeysuckle and ornamental pears are going to be the death of me. They are spreading like wildfire. If I could get $1 for every Bradford pear, ornamental pear that I could cut down with a chainsaw, I could retire tomorrow. Well, I could retire tomorrow, but I'm just not doing it. You know, avoid pesticides. There are a lot of times that we don't need to be using pesticides. Plain and simple. Everything that each of us does as individuals help, but it's going to take organized, widespread efforts. It's going to take changes in legislation. It's going to take global coordination. When you've got species that are, you know, dick thistles. You know where dick thistles go in the wintertime? They go to South America. They're called rice birds because they form flocks in the hundreds of thousands and descend on rice fields and eat the seeds. Farmers down there will get piano wire, long rolls of piano wire, tie it to a post, come back 100 feet, and as the flocks come in, they'll start swinging it around like this. And slaughter them by the hundreds to keep them out of their rice fields. So I mean, it takes a coordinated effort. It's breeding area, it's winter area, it's safe migration lanes. It takes acknowledgement that the issues are real. There is no time for denial. Cats, the #1 issue in my mind, and you want to talk about a political hot potato. If we could take every cat out of the outdoors in the United States and Canada, you would see an immediate bump in bird populations. Don't ask me to promote it. I don't want to need armed guards to get out to my car. I like cats. We had one for a good number of years. The only reason we don't have one today is because of allergies. But they don't belong outside. Questions? Yes, sir.
Have you seen any correlation or overlays on insect populations since they're dropping dramatically in birds?
Oh, insect populations are crashing. I have a very simple survey that I do if I'm going through an area and want to know how healthy it is. Drive at night in the summertime and see how many insect splats you get on your windshield. I still have family in Nebraska, and I can drive through Kansas and still get a lot of insect splats. I get to Nebraska and they just go away.
The other question I had is, you know, on your species where you have the blue and the red, it seems to me you got both ends of the spectrum there. There's no transition.
Exactly right. I mean, there's winners, because this is, you're looking at about 40 years, 45 years worth of results over that 45-year span. If you were to go back and do it in 5-year swatches, you would see some of the transition. That's a quirk of the statistics that are being used. But yeah, insect population, and that's one of those domino effects that as certain insecticides have been used, it has had an impact. But it also comes back to a polyculture. The more plants you have growing, different kinds of plants, the healthier the ecosystem is. You can tell it in birds. If you want more birds in your landscape, have a very diverse landscape. You get up to Nebraska, you got an awful lot of corn and soybeans, and I see the same thing happening in parts of Kansas, and it concerns me.
What about the correlation between the farmers' crops with GMOs and nicoids and so forth, the seeds?
The GMOs are a non-issue. I mean, I probably just offended a bunch of people. My master's degree is in plant breeding and genetics. And GMOs are a case of where people don't understand what's going on. Neonics are another story. We need more work there, and unfortunately, and I say unfortunately because neonicotinoids are the only thing that's keeping emerald ash borer from expanding further across the country than it already is. But it does have an awful lot of, it's got a lot of collateral damage.
But you mentioned, you know, the herbicide like Roundup, for instance, well, that's in seeds now too, so.
The herbicide itself is not in the seed. The gene that was extracted from a soil fungus or soil bacteria is in the seed, but there's not the herbicide glyphosate in the seed. The plant has simply been made to be resistant to it. Which is 30 years of constant use, and we've got weeds that are resistant to it now. So the higher the higher the selection pressure you put on anything, the quicker you build up resistance.
Could you help us know what a neonic is?
Oh, I'm sorry. Neonics are neonicotinoids. It is a class of insecticides, primarily insecticides. Imidacloprid is the most common one. It is used as a lot of times as a seed treatment to give about 30 days protection against seed destroying or plant destroying insects. So as the seed grows, as the seed germinates, it takes up the insecticide. It's about 30 days of resistance. In the case of emerald ash borer, the same product is applied as a drench around the tree in March, and it gets taken in by water and then taken up through the tree. And it goes throughout the entire plant part. But if the emerald ash borer starts to burrow in to the tree, there's enough of it in the xylem that it kills it.
The bird that eats that or suffers?
Fur doesn't eat, the bigger problem is what happens when that ash tree is blooming and there's pollen and the insects come to it in April. Is that how many of those insects are going to become collateral damage? So they are systemic. That was my comment. Yeah. And it's dominoes. The whole environment is dominoes. Another good reason to quit using tobacco.
What did he say?
If you smoke cigarettes.
Oh, okay.
Because there's a lot of neonicotinoids used in tobacco production. Roger Tory Peterson, who basically created bird watching as it is today, once said that birds are the litmus paper of the environment. If you think back to your high school science class, you use litmus paper as a quick and easy test. Because they're a very sensitive very sensitive species. Coal miners would take the canary into the coal mine. If the canary stops singing, get the hell out of the coal. We are ignoring the canary. Plain and simple. Ma'am.
Plastics in the environment, talk about that.
I can't give you a lot. It is scary.
I know that, but impact on birds?
It's the biggest impact right now that I'm seeing reported on is on seabirds. On seabirds.
Right.
Because that seems to be where a lot of it showed. In the terrestrial ecosystems, I just have not seen that much on it.
Okay.
But it is concerning. And it breaks down to smaller and smaller particles, and then they're floating around everywhere.
Yep.
Sir?
What was the deal, you don't like Bradford pears?
Okay,
The reason
Bradford
for that.
pear. Anybody want a 5-minute, no, I can do it in 3 minutes. 3-minute genetic discussion of ornamental pears.
Yes.
The Bradford pear is a type of calorie pear. The Bradford was released in around 1968. Beautiful white flowers. Gorgeous. Every single one that was planted was a clone. I shouldn't say clone, it was rooted. They got this one tree, it's like, that's it. And they started taking cuttings off of it. All genetically the same. Pears are self-sterile. A pear cannot fertilize itself. So these Bradford pears would bloom beautifully. And the petals would fall off and that was it. No problem. Bradford pears had a structural deficiency. They had what in the arboriculture world we call, they had tight crotches. Where are you people thinking? Angles of branch attachment were very, very tight. If you've ever split wood and you've got a branch coming off like this and you try to split it, it doesn't split very easily. If it's like this, it comes right apart. Bradford pears get about 35 years old and they go to hell in a handcart. They just, windstorms, ice storms, just rip them out.
Right.
So they started going back to that original calorie pear selection that came over from China in the 1880s. And they started looking at all this other calorie pears. Oh, well, now here's one that's got better angle. So they started coming out with Chanticleer and White House and Capital. Bradford pears, same beautiful flowers, better structure, and just genetically enough different that now they can start cross-pollinating. And literally, trees went from being sterile, having no fruit one year, to being loaded the next year. Birds eat those seeds, those little fruits. It's a worthless fruit. You can't make a pear cobbler out of it, I'll guarantee you. I have tried to eat one, and they're pretty nasty. And they've got a big seed. Birds eat it, the seed goes through them, that seed gets roughed up, going through the gizzard and all. And next year it's growing. In Missouri and eastern Kansas, you can go to areas, you know, a grove, this big and bigger. And the trees are this far apart. And
So
they're
it's a
all calorie pears.
It's like the red cedar.
Yeah.
Only you can't burn these suckers.
Yeah.
So that's the problem. So they have really
Okay.
become a problem. They have really become a problem. Flowering crabs, there are hundreds of flowering crabapple varieties. And they will produce fruit, and the birds will eat them, and you never see a volunteer apple tree, or rarely. Forget the dang pears, plant apples. So that's why I don't like Bradford pears.
So the habitat that they provide is okay.
Yeah, it's not that the habitat is
It's
just,
just the fact that they're taking over.
They're taking over.
Geography.
it's become a noxious weed.
Okay.
Oh, the birds love it. The birds love it. Oh my gosh, what did we start here? Shannon,
Okay, what about great-tailed grackles?
what about great-tailed grackles?
I mean, are they still moving through and?
They seem to have had some contractions, some range contraction, or population contractions. I don't see them nearly as often in my neighborhood as I used to.
Walmart parking lots.
That seems to be the preferred habitat, is large parking lots, you know. They're garbage birds. We're gonna go here and then here, ma'am.
What about wind farms? Are they killing our birds?
Got another hour? Collisions with wind turbines aren't that big of a deal. It can be that. The other problem is, it's hard to know. Because they're on private property, it's hard to get permission to do surveys there. And so many of the birds are gonna be taken out of the air are small, and they disappear very quickly. Same thing with tower kills. I'm far more concerned about collisions with communications towers. Think of proliferation of cell phone towers. If it's freestanding without any guy lines, I'm not too worried about it. But those guy wires are just like the farmers in Venezuela swinging the piano wire. And some of the surveys that have been done around those have been done with a lot of conditions from the communication company and the people doing the research. The bigger problem in my mind, two bigger problems with wind farms, you've got a lot of, I mean, when they wear out, what do you do with them? And one of the big, I mean, I helped write
Send
wind.
them back to China.
Yes, you're right. Good luck with that. I did zoning regulations for wind farms for Erie County. And we got them done after a year and a half, got them done about a month before the governor put a moratorium on the Flint Hills. But we got good regulations. But, you know, decommissioning them. The other thing is, anything in the prairie, more than about 6 feet tall, prairie chickens and other grassland nesting species are going to associate with a raptor perch, and they're going to move away from it. The taller it is, the bigger the donut of exclusion. So it really takes, and where do we like to put wind turbines? On ridges, highest point, same place prairie chickens like to nest. So, over here, there's a question over here, son, please.
She got it.
Okay. I am going to, I mean, I've been going for over an hour now. I will be here to answer more questions if you have them. In the very last slide in these handouts has my email contact on it. If you have questions, never hesitate to email me. Right? People contact me all the time. You're just supposed to say right. Yeah, okay, thank you.
We're not done yet.
How's Dan doing?
Also, Chuck mentioned.
5 days of continuous chemotherapy, 3 or 4 bouts in a row.
Everybody's welcome.
We'll make it, I think, but it's going to be
We've
rough.
had a little pitch this year. Dan Bappa, who for the last 3 or 4 years, he's kind of spearheaded the organization of the bird count, is pretty critically ill right now. So we're kind of doing the bird count by committee. There's a good number of us will be there. We welcome anybody and everybody. We meet at Lakewood Lodge this coming Saturday at 8 o'clock. And we'll break it into quadrants. If we've got a whole lot of people, we can split the quadrants into other quadrants. And it's a 15-mile diameter circle that we go and explore and count birds. So please think about coming out. You don't need to be an expert. I consider myself a moderate one, just enough to get myself in trouble. And I've been doing it a long time, so we welcome anybody and everybody. And just please consider coming out.
It's a good way to learn.
Yeah.
I keep seeing your stuff on Facebook, and I go, I gotta get down there.
Yeah, we'll meet at Lakewood at 8 o'clock. We'll burn in the morning, meet back at Lakewood for noon, or if you don't want to, if your car doesn't want to. And then we will go out for the afternoon and then meet up at 5 o'clock. If you don't want to do the whole day, that's fine. Do half the day, do a certain area. If your house is within the quadrant area or the 15 miles, you know, use your feeders. You want to sit and have a cup of coffee by the window for the day or whatever. But you don't have to be an expert. You can do whatever you want. You can, if you want to just bird Lakewood or bird the zoo. I know the zoo's in the quadrant. So we'll have some fun.
We need the number, random number generator.
I have my random number generator right here. What's your biggest number?
52.
52.
Okay, we're gonna let you pick. Well, of course, this is the prize. The Sandhill crane pictures.
That's donated by Jim Griggs. A lot of you probably know Jim.
This is from the museum, a book about buffalo. Talking about Marge, this is one of her books. And if you want to read it and give it back to donate to someone else, go ahead. Somebody know what this is?
It's a surprise.
Candy.
When it, open it up.
It's a
Candy.
mystery box, candy. A Finch sock feeder.
Karen Jordan.
Cute little Bruno's. A Bonnie original. And Page's personal.
You can throw a cat in your
I know you can count, if you see a species, is it during the count week?
You got a feeder with some seeds.
You know,
Yeah,
you can count it,
Another
think
feeder
so.
what
with
the
seeds.
parameter is on that?
I do not know.
Okay, because I have red-breasted nuthatches.
And we got 2 cake feeders.
I call that a squirrel feeder.
So
Take them right out, the whole thing.
Oh, we got this. We got a poster. All righty.
Okay. Number 38.
Emily Winship.
Yeah.
Sitting next to the guy with the number generator.
What would you like to have?
I'll take the present thingy.
She likes to live on the edge.
Thank you.
Kiddos are also welcome on the bird count, so if you guys want a bird Saturday, we need young eyeballs.
Young ears.
Good.
Number 27.
Jim, Mary,
That's me. Marvin,
Marvin, I'm sorry.
what do you want? Okay.
There's a good husband.
Suet feeder.
Okay, next.
Number 46.
We're gonna have to have people print their names.
That's the hardest job here.
Starts with an H.
Robert Hurst.
Well, the last people.
You're from Salina. Robert.
Hursal. K-E-L?
Okay, let's do it again.
random number, all you can do is shake.
Probably not.
Shake it harder.
Very good.
34.
34.
I bet you can shake it harder.
Just don't launch it.
Dan Flory.
Please don't launch it. It's up to you to
Dan
have it.
Flory.
The picture.
You got it.
This one? Mm-hmm. Good choice, good choice. Not no wrong, percent no right.
Okay, shake it up.
Don't launch it.
Number
15.
Number 15.
15.
Betty Thimmel.
Show them what's left.
Look. Audubon book?
I'll do the wild bird feeder.
This one?
Yeah.
Number 5.
Joe McKenzie.
Take the rock.
He wants a rock.
Don't throw it.
Thank you for the good article in the paper.
I finally found it.
Bad idea.
Shake it up.
Take it like you never had. 10.
Number 10.
Nancy Bowden.
I don't need it. The feeder.
This one?
Back when I know her.
Oh, careful.
Good.
14.
I really, right there.
Marge's book.
Oh,
Yeah.
that'd be a good one.
That one?
Yeah.
Yeah. Hi, Chuck. How are you?
Good.
After you've read it, just add your name to the front and bring her back.
Is it time to leave?
Yes.
32.
What's the number?
32.
It's on your bowl. Boss?
We got a soot feeder, we got this.
The soot feeder.
Soot feeder.
Great. Yeah. I've never heard of it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Shake it up.
11.
John Bowden.
Draw again.
Do it again.
About that.
38.
Oh, Emily, wood chip, you've already got it.
You got it.
Sorry.
Do it again. It's not supposed to repeat.
43.
I know you're all waiting. Mike? Waynesy? Wayne? Mike?
Anybody named Mike?
Do we have any mics?
Anybody need Mike?
Must be.
Okay.
One of
Go
the
again.
last
Check it out.
people to sign either.
You had to look at each other.
29.
We're getting there. Hold on.
Linda Davis.
Oh. What's in the bag?
It's a finch feeder. Let's go with this one. Are they separate?
I think so.
Okay,
Separate.
so it's a
Yeah.
finch stock feeder, it's a cute little feeder.
The Finch feeder.
I have to encourage her.
You could be on The Price is Right.
Yeah.
Give that wheel a spin.
Seriously, please get one.
Okay, next.
Again, 39.
39 again.
39 again.
No, that was 38 before.
39?
Again.
Eva.
Again?
Boy, that ain't right.
I'll take the vote.
Okay. Two left.
Four. We're close.
Mary Lou McKenzie? Or somebody?
Somebody, I know somebody I know before.
Thank you, little Peter.
You gotta get to one. You gotta get
Okay, while they're shaking, our next meeting is January 16th. Mike Miller from the Assistant Secretary of Wildlife, Fisheries, and Boating.
Okay, come on, shake it good. Shake it until it's one. 0.
That's close enough to one.
Yes, go pick one.
Number 1, Stan Marshall.
Woohoo! I can go pick.